Cool. Hello everyone on YouTube and welcome. So this is a seminar that I'm holding. My name is Ryland Taylor and this is my texture baking seminar. I absolutely love texturing. I think it is wonderful, but we'll get into that in a second. But basically I threw this presentation over the last 6 hours together and I've just been trying to rush to get all the images. So let's have a look. So yeah, just a bit about me. So this is me, hello. This is the main software that I use. So do my modeling. ZBrush is like organic stuff. Marmoset I love for baking. We'll get to that later in this presentation. Substance Painter is just beautiful for texturing, more because of the Substance suite than Painter itself. Unreal Engine is my favorite engine, and then Photoshop I just do any image editing in. And I do know lots of other software, but they're more like intermediate knowledge. So those are my key software. And just a little bit about me, I've done 3 higher education courses in the United Kingdom. So I know lots about game design, finishing on my master's degree in environment art, and currently I am on a bootcamp called Mastered, and this is where this presentation is being shared right now as a seminar to other students who are struggling to handle baking, because it is flipping complex, man. So let's have a look then. What are we going to be looking at today? What's the context? So we're going to be looking at all these things, yes, and it gets progressively harder as we go along. So we're just going to quickly look at what is texture baking and why did you want to use it in the first place. This is all based around normal, so we're just going to quickly look at that. The different types of baking, the pros and cons of those types, using the best of them together, and then we're just going to talk quickly about some common troubleshooting that I see students do all the time. UVs, projection settings, comparing a few baking software together. The 3 we're going to be talking about today are XNormal, Substance Painter, and Marmoset Toolbag. Some extra tips, that's where things get really beyond. And then just a closing quick recap. So during this seminar, I'm going to be baking 3 assets, a simple cube, we're going to be doing a cool chain, and then we're going to be doing something that's just designed to be a pain in the butt on purpose, just to really test the limits of your skill. Cool, and then I'm going to be jumping to a few web pages as well, but we'll get to that in a bit. Just to quickly talk about why am I bothering to do this, because I've got a lot of work to do at the moment. I think it's really important that we all help out each other. 3D is really complicated, man. Like it's so confusing half the time, and all the information's on the internet, but having it ready and available for you is something else. But bad art also really bugs me, and what frustrates me is when you see bad art, it's not the true skill of the person, they just are struggling and they don't understand why they're struggling. So that's another thing. I absolutely love hyperrealism. I think faking PBR is like the ultimate deception for the modern age. If someone looks at your image and they're like, oh, that looks real, then I'm like, yes, I won. Cool. So video games is all smoke and mirrors. Everything is just baking in the background, but as the camera walks through the level, the player walks through the level, it all just looks like everything's working. And then baking, as I said before, is my favorite stage of the pipeline. We'll get to that. Cool. So let's have a look. So opening. So we're looking at a snippet of a 3D pipeline. So what we've got here is we've got UV mapping on the left, we've got texture baking, and then we've got the actual texturing of PBR itself. Cool, so just a disclaimer that basically all of the images in this presentation are not mine. Big respect to everyone who's uploaded this on the internet for me to then facilitate to everyone else onwards. So I don't take ownership for any of this. Like I said, I'm just trying to facilitate what I've found in a clear demonstration way for you. So the focus on this presentation is not about UV mapping or about texturing. It's just purely on baking, and I'm going to have to talk about both of those subjects on the left and the right. But I'm the type of person that will just go on for ages about those things, so I'm just trying to focus myself personally. And then just to say that this stuff has taken me years to learn, so don't expect to be able to get a lot of this stuff on day one. I think it's been like 3 or 4 years I've been learning this. And then just to quickly talk about what I personally consider someone who's good at baking. So if you're a beginner, you can bake something, and something is better than nothing. So don't be ashamed of that, honestly. So you've got something, but it's got problems, and you don't quite understand how to fix those problems because you have to troll through the internet looking for the solutions. An intermediate person is someone who can just get perfect bakes. There's no problems. It's just as good as it can be, really. And then someone who's really advanced at baking is someone who's just gone beyond. They've realized that they really just want to push perfect bakes and see what's left. and just really it's just going the extra mile for no reason other than they just enjoy it. So we'll get to that stuff later on. And then just a shout out to these specific 3 people: Leonardo, Lezzi, Carlos Lemos, and Joe Wilson, who's also known as Earthquake. Leonardo Lezzi, he's done basically a guide on the internet. It used to be free, but it's paid now. Some of the images are in here, but I've removed his annotations. So I'll show you that in a bit. Actually, I'll just show it to you now. So this is Leonardo Lezzi's one. Let's bring this up. F11. Cool, so it used to be free, but now it's about 10 euros. But yeah, I'm going to show some of the images in this. Absolutely recommend this. Please go away, Norton. So that's that. And then we've got Carlos Lemos. Sorry if I butchered your name there, mate. And he's got a guide completely on normal maps. This thing is absolutely insane, and this is free. I'll put these links up after anyway. And then Joe Wilson, he hasn't got like a specific guide, but what he's done for us is he's literally like he's got so many posts on Polycount, it's ridiculous, helping people solve their problems. So this guy is literally just a pioneer, and I've seen this guy come up in my master's lectures at uni as well. So enough credit to these guys. It's just anyway, cool. So let's get into it. What is texture baking, and why do you want to do it anyway? So why can't we just chuck on something that we found off Google onto a 3D model and just call it done? Kind of like Megascans. Well, what the purpose of texture baking is for is it's more for video games than film, because in video games you can only have so many polygons on a model. So right here we've got a low poly model. I believe this model is Joe Wilson's. And you can see it's a very low topology on this one, and this is his high poly version. And what he's done here is he sent all of the data from this high poly straight onto the low poly. And captured all of the detail. And without this wireframe, it would probably be quite difficult to tell that they're actually separate. You can actually see a little bit of jagging on the silhouette right here. But unless you're, someone who's just a normal gamer, they're not going to pay attention to something like that. They don't care. You're only going to see that stuff if you look for it. But basically, the idea of texture baking is that you're faking, smoke and mirrors and all that stuff. So here's just another quick example of an organic piece compared to a hard surface one. So you've got a face here, and this is 6,000. I'm sorry that it's so small, but this is 6,000 polygons. And then you've got probably a ZBrush sculpt or Blender sculpt, and this one's 6 million polygons. And then what he's done is he's taken the detail off this one and put it on this one, and it's come off like this. So this first and the third one are exactly the same in terms of poly count, but these two look basically identical due to baking. So when we do baking, what is it we're trying to achieve? So the biggest 2 things that we're trying to achieve is getting a normal map and an ambient occlusion map. So before Substance Painter hit the scene and completely changed the texturing world, these are the 2 maps that people were obsessed with. We don't care about anything else, and the end result we're trying to get is just normal and AO. So don't worry about these other 4 so much as these first 2, because they're the most important. So just to explain what these are. So a normal map is where you take the high poly data and you project it onto the low poly, but you don't displace the topology of the low poly at all. It's just affecting the face normals, and we'll get into what face normals are in a bit. But and then AO is ambient occlusion. So anything that's black is an area that's been occluded by light, i.e. light hasn't been able to hit that area so successfully. So it's just kind of a way of faking shadows. And then so that's these top 2, and then these bottom 4. These are for PBR texturing, so going on to the next stage of the pipeline. So you've got curvature, which tells you if an area is concaved or convexed. So a concaved area is something that's a bump, and a convex area is something that's like a divot or like a hole. And I can't remember which way around it is, but one of them shows up white. I think it's the concaved areas are white here, and the convex areas are black. Now, why the hell do you care about that? Well, the reason is because when you take it into texturing, what you can do is use a smart material, and it can say, hey, oh, that area is white. Well, that area must have, maybe it has more scratches then because it's on the edge of something, so it's more likely to get dented on that area. And if it sees a black area, it might be like, okay, so that's a hole in the mesh, or like somewhere it's depressed. So I reckon that dust and dirt are more likely to, and grime are more likely to gather in those areas. Rather than if you just quickly wipe a model, it's more likely to gather up and build up in those areas. So curvature is pretty cool. Thickness. So thickness is exactly what it sounds like. It's how thick areas of the model are. So I believe, I'm struggling to remember which way around some of these are, but I believe white means that there's lots going on inside, and black means that it's quite an empty area. So just so you know what that is. Why would you use that in PBR texturing? Well, a good one is normally for characters. So characters, when you shine your hand up against the light, you get that reddish. Light is actually displacing through that rather than being stopped, and that's called subsurface scattering. And thickness is a good way of determining, things like wax as well, not just skin, but so many things. Even milk, you determine the scatter depth and how the light refracts through it. So thickness is a good one for that. Material ID, this one's pretty cool. You basically, on your high poly, you just give the different areas different colors, and then when you take it and bake it, you can then say, hey, I want bronze on this orange bit, I want silver on this green bit, and I want, maybe some other mad color on this red bit. So it's just a really quick and easy way to be able to texture the different various parts of your model. When it comes to scan data, it's a bit more confusing because the scan just comes out as lots of triangles, which is a massive pain. You can make material IDs, but it's probably not worth it compared to some of the masking options you get. And then what position is it's literally, if you had a point on the left that's red, and if you had a point on the right that's green, it's literally just a gradient between those 2 points. So you go from fully red all the way over to slowly fully green. And a good reason for doing that, let's say the bottom is red and let's say the top is green. If you had some sort of, this happens in Unreal as well, you can use this. If you have some sort of like weathering effect, like the wall is dripping or like rust is coming down, you can say, hey, I want it to start fully at the green, but I want it to start ending towards the red, somewhere down here. So position's really good because across multiple 3D objects in your texturing session, you can use effects across, consistently across those things. So that's why these form maps are really important for PBR texturing and look development, because we're really trying to sell that this model is from this specific scene. And these just let you manipulate textures in a way through smart materials that makes it really easy to achieve that. And then just to go back to these two again, these two will directly affect the look of your model, whereas these four are just designed to make texturing easier on later on. Cool. So, what are normals? Okay, so here we have a sphere, and you can see this has got a poly count of 64. And no matter how much we divide the sphere, unfortunately, you can still see that these hard lines, and you can keep going and going, but in video games, you're going to get a ridiculous amount of polygons. It's just not beneficial. So what you can see here is a sphere which has exactly the same poly count, except one has hard edges and one has soft edges. And you can just tell this one looks really smooth and this one looks, like polygons, but they have the exact same poly count. So what's going on here? So a normal is when a light ray hits the surface, what angle does it bounce off at? We need a mathematic vector to be able to say at which angle it's going to bounce off at. So we're just quickly going to talk about face normals and vertex normals, because there's two types of normals on a 3D object. And then in Maya, the term is hard and soft edges, but in Blender, some of you might be familiar with the term shaded smooth and shaded flat. Cool, so what we'll actually do then is I think we'll just jump into Maya. Yeah, we'll jump into Maya quickly. I just want to show a quick example. I haven't prepared a scene for this, so we'll just do it quickly. We'll just load it up. So yeah, we're just going to quickly look at the difference between face normals and vertex normals, because this is something I didn't quite get for a while. And a lot of these terms, when people talk to you about them, they kind of just expect you to know them, and it's not really fair. Even at university, they used to do it. Cool. So we're just going to make a quick sphere. Let's just turn on anti-aliasing. Cool. And then let's just make this sphere bigger, because it's the scene is currently in centimeters. That's why it was so small. Okay. So we've got a sphere here. Let's do one of these so we can just show the differences between them. Let's turn off this grid. Okay, and then let's just make this hard edges. Okay, so this is what we were looking at just a second ago in the presentation. Okay, so let's have a look quickly at what face normals and vertex normals are. So we can go into display in Maya, and we can go display polygons, vertex normals, and they're absolutely tiny. Believe me, they're there, but they're tiny, so let's just make these smaller. Let's just delete this one and have a look. Still tiny, let's go in further. Okay, we're starting to see them. They're very they're very small, so let's just go really small. Okay, here we go. Now you can see the vertex normals. Make it even smaller. Cool, there we go, we're getting somewhere. And then I'm just also going to turn on face normals. So face normals. Okay, so if I just turn that on. So what you can see here is you've got a line coming out from the center of the face, and that's the face normal. And then you've got a couple of lines coming out from each single vertex, and those are the vertex normals. Hello, whoever just joined, if you could just mute your microphone. So we've already started, cheers. Cool, and then so we're just going to shade this smooth. Okay, so you can see here now that the face normal has one normal line, and when it's shaded smooth, there's only one normal line for every vertex. So if we just jump back to the presentation. Wicked. Cool, so this is a soft edge right here. And what's happening is we're taking the distance from this surface and this surface, and we're averaging out the angle along this normal right here. You can see that more clearly there. It's taking these two face normals and it's angling it out right there. And then the opposite of that is the hard edges. So what's happening here instead is you've got these two very angular surfaces, and it's split that surface into two normals, one to shade this face and one to shade that face. And you can see there it's split it right there. Cool. And then that's just exactly what I've shown you anyway. The difference is that, so if you have a vertex that's attached by 6 polygons, you're going to have 6 vertex normals splining off from that. So something that's just important to note is that this type of cylinder, because there's 4 times the amount of normals as this cylinder, it takes 4 times the calculation to just shade one single vertex. But we'll come to ways at the end about optimizing that and stuff. All you need to know for now is that the difference between face normals is that shades the center of the face, and vertex normals is more focused on the edges and the vertices themselves. The reason why you need to know this is because when you make a normal map, what you're actually doing is you're overwriting the face normal. So instead of just having one vector that's protruding from the center of the face normal, instead you're saying that for every single pixel on the normal map, I want to have a separate vector for every single pixel. So if you've got you know, a 1024 pixel image across just one face, you've technically got 1024 little spikes sticking out the face, shading that area. So this is how we fake lighting. So normal maps are basically about messing with face normals, but not vertex normals. That's something slightly different. They kind of cross over a little bit because when you bake the high poly, you know, you still have to shade the high poly and stuff, but we'll get to stuff like that later. So let's just move on. Okay, so I believe we're actually going to get into what this looks like when you bake now. So this is a low poly, and we've got vertex normals enabled here. They're very small. And you can see it's just, this is shaded hard, so this are just sticking up. And what we're going to do, this is our high poly, and it's got a torus on it. These are the normals for the torus. You can see it's crazy. What we're going to do now is we're going to take the low poly, we're going to take the high poly, we're going to bake the normals from the high poly, and this is what our low poly looked like this originally, and after we finish the baking, it's actually going to look like this. So this is what it's going to look like. So it's going to have the same geometry as the low poly, except it's going to look very similar to the high poly. The catch is that it's still flat. So no matter what you do with normal maps, it's always going to look flat on the silhouette. You know, if you're looking at it directly on, then you probably won't notice it. But if you're looking at it at a side angle, you're going to notice that it's completely flat. Moving into height maps and displacement maps, they actually move the surface geometry, but you need resolution and enough vertices to support that. Cool. So just want to quickly talk about, we'll get into this a little bit more later as well. Polygons have a face up and a face down. So this white one here is our low poly. This green one here is our high poly. And then this red one is our frontal distance, and this orange one is our rear distance. So what we do is we basically, like, a good way I see this is a hamburger, right? So you've got the buns, and the top of the bun is your height, frontal distance, and the bottom of the bun is your rear distance. And anything between those buns is just going to get compressed flat onto your low poly. So these can go higher and lower. So with polygons, like I said, there's a face up and a face down. What I've done here in this image is I've just reversed the normals, or reversed the faces for all of them. So you can see now all the normals are actually flipped in the opposite direction. The reason I want to explain this is because the frontal distance is now reversed and the rear distance is now reversed. So in Substance Painter, when we're baking, on here we would have to push up the frontal distance, whereas if it was the other way around, right now we would be having to push up the rear distance. And then just one last thing is this is what your model should actually look like. You don't want lots of gaps between your baking distances. You want to compress them as much as possible without them overlapping, because the bigger your baking distance is, the more stuff that could get in the way. And what you're doing is when you bake, you send basically a light ray down every single normal, and then you capture that on the low poly. So the more distance you have between the sandwich, the more the longer the distance the rays are going to have to travel, and the more the more noise and the more random little things or a model you didn't delete might get captured. So you just want to keep it the baking as tight as possible. So all these principles, you have to now imagine, this is a very simple example, whereas this is a very complicated example. This is some form of gun, probably from ArtStation, and you can see this is a very complicated high poly. But all of these principles now apply to this model. Okay. So average normals on. So this is the first type of baking. So if you can do this, going back to what I was talking about before, you're a decent beginner. So this is some documentation from posted from Algorithmic on Substance Designer. And this is the first, so there's two types of baking, and this is the first one we're going to look at. I'm actually going to bake this in a second. So using the exact same colors as before in the hamburger that I just showed you, you've got your low res mesh here, which is the white one. You've got your high res mesh, which is the green one. You've got your frontal distance, which is this red one. And you've got your rear distance, which I had to add in here, which is this orange one. And you can see that these numbers, you can bring these up and down to expand or condense your rear distance. And then with, so this is average normals on, so i.e. smooth shading. So you can see here that the angles, they aren't dead straight like they were with hard edges. But basically the point that you need, the only thing you need to remember about average normals on, or cage baking as they call it online, is that the angles aren't dead straight. So it's best for bevels really. So let's actually just give that a go. So let's actually do a bake. So I'm just going to show you a scene, just so you can understand what we're baking. If my loads. I'm actually just going to close this scene as well. Too many scenes. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Load. Okay, so here we go. So this is our low poly cube. Let's just hide this. And then, oh, still loading. Give it a chance. Cool, yeah. Okay, so this is our low poly cube. And this is our, let me just turn on this. So what I've done basically is I've taken that low poly and I've just added some fencing lines or holding edges, and then basically done some quick hard surface modeling to create this, and then I've actually fully applied that, which is, this is now our high poly. So what we're going to do is we're going to bake this high poly onto this cube. Cool. And then just to show frontal and rear distances, if I just go into this mode and turn that off. Oh, too many cubes. Okay, so this is our low poly, and this outer one would be our frontal distance, and this inner one is going to be our rear distance. So anything between this vertex here and this vertex here is going to be projected from the back and from the front onto that point. So it's the same if we had, say, if we followed this white line on the grid here, let's say we had a detail here like a bolt, and even like the back of a bolt here, that's going to be projected onto there, and that's going to be projected onto there. Cool. And then the last thing to just note quickly is that with your high poly, you should color them. So I've actually colored this high poly red on the faces and green on the edges. You might be saying, okay, well, there's a bit more of a face there, but with hard surface it actually bends them a little bit. So you can see it's still bending from this point onwards. But yeah, anyway, doesn't matter so much. Cool, so this is what we're going to be baking. So let's actually give that a roll. Let's open up Substance Painter. Painter, 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 where have you gone? Cool, and I actually just updated this today. Okay, let me just check chat. Nope, no questions yet. That's good. Man, Painter always takes ages to load. Okay, I just need to reset my UI because I've got it set up for my multiple screens. Painter drives me nuts because there's, especially Designer as well, because there's too many flipping windows. So if you have a multi-monitor setup, you're better off just spreading it across. Okay, so we're gonna make a new file. Okay, so in file we're gonna select our low poly. That was me testing height maps. So cube low, I've exported these already. And today we're going to be baking at 2K resolution. Something that I just quickly forgot to mention, the three things you need for baking are a low poly, a high poly, and you need to have UVs on your low poly. If you don't have UVs on your low poly, then it won't work. Because what you're doing is you're recording data from the high poly, projecting it onto the low poly, and wherever it lands on the low poly, it then gets saved onto the UV texture map. So what I'll do quickly actually is if I just bring up that cube, did I close it? Yeah, I closed it. Okay, we'll load it in the background. I'll show you quickly the UVs in a second. And that's just reloading. Let's just keep continuing with this. Compute tangent space for a fragment, that's something for Unreal, so if you use Unreal, tick that on. UDIMs, don't worry about that, that's more of a film thing in games as well. But yeah, that's totally fine, cool, so just hit OK. So now what we've done is we've just loaded in our low poly into Substance Painter, and this is what we've got so far. Okay, so the first, just delete that layer. The first thing that I always do in Substance Painter is, or any texturing software for that matter, is to change the HDRI. So currently this is our HDRI, that's default loaded. Let me turn off this blur. Okay, and if it's not black and white, you're going to be seeing these colors projected and reflected onto this model. So I'm just going to pick a black and white. Why is it doing that? Change. Like HDRI. Let's see if that works. Wow, it's not loading my environment. Okay, it's being a massive pain, of course it is. Where's the shelf gone? Shelf. HDRI. Okay, low, front, 2 backs. Wow, kind of regretting updating Substance Painter now. Should be showing me all of my Okay, we'll come back to that. Let's just continue for now. Yeah, but basically I always put on a black and white HDRI purely because you're going to get lights artifacting and it's just going to confuse you. So let's just turn that back off. Cool. Oh, so now they pop up. Oh, I see how it is. Trying to make me look stupid, aren't you, Painter? Okay, it's not loading any of my normal substance ones. It's only loading my flip normals and my toolbag ones. Okay, so this is a black and white one. So let's just deal with this for now. Okay, it's just loading. Okay, so this HDRI looks... Okay, it's pretty white. Okay, that's fine, it'll do for now. It's better than what we had before. Oh no, I had the blur up, that's why. Yeah, so this is our HDRI. It's just some easy studio lights, but the point is it's fully grayscale, so it's just black and white. Okay, let's turn off the opacity. Okay, let's get actually into baking. So let's set up our scene a little bit more. So we're using a 2K material, and I want to be able to see the ambient occlusion, so I'm just going to add that. That's fine. I'm not doing anything with metallic or roughness or height today. I'm just going to be doing these three: color, normal, and ambient occlusion for now. Because remember, normal and ambient occlusion are the core maps that are our pure success. And then let's get into the bake settings. Bake mesh maps. So this is a horrible menu because, especially if you've never seen it before, there's lots of blinking lights and too many options. But we're just going to focus on some really key things. The first thing is your output size. So what size are we baking? So let's bake 2K. Don't worry about dilation width too much. So then we need to add our high poly model. So cube high. There we go. And now you can see all these warning triangles have now changed to actual mesh ones, so that's a good sign. If you want to use a specific cage, you can. Manual cage there. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, here we go. Magic settings. Max frontal and max rear distance. So those are the top and the bottom of the hamburger. So if you have some details of that are really extruded out, you'll probably have to play with, make these a little bit bigger. But like I said before, you want your hamburger as tight as possible, so you want to bring these down. That's why it starts on 0.01. so it wants it to be tight. We'll talk about anti-aliasing a little bit later. Match we'll talk about later. There's another option called by mesh name. I'll go into that. And then some of this other stuff we'll talk about later. So for now, we're just going to bake normal. So let's just turn off all of these to save time. Oh, we've actually added some in here. I have never seen bent normals here, so that's cool. I'll have a play with that later. Okay, so we should be basically good to go right now. Let's give it a bake. And let's see what happens. Wow, that was quick. Okay. So I think the HDRI that we have is not doing us any favors. Oh, so now it loads the painter ones that I wanted. This is my favorite HDRI. Yeah, okay. Soft, one front, two backs. That's my favorite HDRI there. You'll see me use that in a lot of renders as well, even in Arnold. Some people use this one, soft for tubes, or there's one with flags, I believe. Pretty cool. But let me just show you what the HDRI looks like and the reason why I like it. So what we've got is we've got two very bright white lights, and then we've got just one big circle one. So one big circle one at the front and two little kind of area lights at the back. Okay. Okay, so we've actually just successfully done a bake right here. So if we go into, in this menu, you can actually look at all the different bake maps or any texture maps that you have. Just to mention, there are two sets of channels. You've got single channel, which is anything that you've textured, and you've got mesh maps, which is anything you've baked. So if you see normal twice, the reason is because this is what you've been texturing and this is what you've purely baked. So we're just going to go mesh maps normal. And you can see here that we've actually got some normal data now. So we've got, we've actually got a normal map. So let me just show the UVs quickly for this low poly, which I was talking about before. So these are my UVs for my low poly. You can see they're in the 0 to 1 space, and I've just taken the 6 faces and just maximized them as much as possible with a bit of spacing. Cool. Close that. Back into Painter, and then just actually be able to show that here. F3 is it? Yeah, there they are. So you can do a split view. Which one of these is split view? There we go, split view. So I actually normally use this most of the time. So if we go back into material, and I move the lighting now, you can actually see, it's not a very strong effect actually, but you can actually see that the lighting is moving. So we've successfully baked a cube now with average normals on to capture bevels. So what we're going to do is, now that we've done that, is we're actually just going to bake the rest of these maps and see what happens. So world space normals, that's just a different type of normal map. Let's have that. ID map, let's turn this on, just make sure it's on the right one. So you can see here, one of them will say FBX files. Yeah, material color. Reads the material color from the high definition mesh, works only on FBX files. So what I did when I exported from Miles, I exported FBX files. So material color is the right one. I think it's the default one, it didn't used to be. Ambient occlusion, let's have some of that. Curvature, want some of that. Position, let's have some of that. Thickness, that one's going to be boring, but let's have some of that. Oh, so you can bake height map, that's awesome. Okay, yeah, we'll just leave these bottom ones for now. There's something else, and we'll just bake those. So you're going to see a bunch of maps will pop up on the left here. And it's pretty cool, actually. You can see the process of what's happening. There we go. And now we can inspect our model. Let's just close this. So we've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So let's have a look at those. So we've seen our normal map. You can see it's baked there, the edges. World space normal is a different type of normal map. It's essentially the same thing, but just in world space versus object space or tangent space. ID map, this is the colors that I assigned to my high poly. So you can see now, if I wanted to texture my edges with a material, that would be really easy as per texturing the faces. A good way to imagine that is like the different parts of the gun in the presentation you saw earlier. Ambient occlusion is pretty boring. You can see there's a little bit of grey, and the reason is because there's no light really being like missed. The light rays can basically hit all parts of that cube, the beveled one. Curvature, so you can see here, anything that's concaved is now going white. We don't have any convex areas on a beveled cube, otherwise they'd be going black. So that bake's worked. Position, like I said, you've just got like a super multicolor gradient for specific effects that you want to apply later. Thickness, pretty self-explanatory. I believe that the reason why this is slightly darker is because the distance is reduced in those areas. It's actually curving right there. And let's have a look what else we got. So the rest doesn't matter. Cool, so you've now successfully baked a cube. So if you've gotten this far, you're now definitely considered a beginner at baking. So wicked. Let's just go back to material. Okay, and then from there, you can then go into your layers, and you could add lots of, let's just find a quick smart material just to demonstrate that. Where's the shelf gone? They keep moving stuff in this shelf. Delete that. Smart materials. Let's find a cool smart material. Okay. These materials, yeah, smart materials. Let's have a look for a cool one. Maybe like hull damaged. Oh no, everyone loves this one. This is teachers hate it when you use this one, machinery, because students like to chuck it on, and they don't edit it at all. um, so let's just have a quick look inside the machinery. Okay, let's just move this menu out, otherwise it's going to drive me nuts. Okay, the reason why this looks terrible actually is because I've turned off my channels for metallic and roughness. So let's just put them back in quickly. Cool, okay, so it's actually looking like a material now. Okay, so let's have a look through this thing. And what I'm looking for quickly is you normally find it's actually the masks that use these material. It's not using it there. Mask editor. No. Okay, yep, this is what I'm looking for. Okay, so in this smart material machinery, in the dust material itself, so there's three materials or four materials in the smart material. We've got metal base, dirt, dust, and rust. In the dust, I've gone into the mask for it, and then there's a mask stack. So these are different layers applied to that mask. So I'm in the mask builder for dust, smart, yeah, blah 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 blah. Yeah, it's massive. This is why smart materials are complicated. But you can see that in the specific mask builder mask. You can see that what it's doing is it's actually taking information from one of our bake maps, world space, normal, position, curvature, and ambient occlusion, and it's taking the data from those bake maps and using them to manipulate this material. So, fun fact, what's going to happen if we just delete these? Goodbye, 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 goodbye. Hey, it's like, oh no. So this is what the material actually looks like if you haven't baked anything. So if you drop that machinery material in and it looks like this, you now know why. It's because it hasn't got any bake maps to reference where the data's meant to be moving. So yeah, you can see there, these big fat X's mean, hey, we can't actually apply this texturing, parameter because we haven't got the bake map to work it out. Cool, so like I said, I'm focusing on baking here, not on texturing, but I just wanted to explain that quickly. This is why those four maps are really important. So we're done with this now. So well done, you've baked a cube, good job. That is probably also most useful for anything organic. So if you have a human, or some sort of curved object, ovals, anything like that, they're very similar to baking bevels, so you'll probably be using this type of baking average normals on. Don't worry about too much of this information, I've probably repeated it. But cool, let's move on to the next type of baking. So next we're going to bake a chain. I'm just going to have a bit of water quickly because I am parched. Too much talking. Cool, average normals off. I'm coining this as planar baking because it's actually very similar to planar mapping in UV mapping in Maya. So cage baking, planar baking. Okay, so this is the other version. This is similar to the hard edges. So what we have on this one is that the normals are coming straight down rather than at angles. They're just hitting perpendicular to the surface of the mesh. So you can see it's the same thing here. So we've got a low res mesh and the high poly, but instead of it coming at angles, it's just coming flat on. The reason why this is important to know is you can see this big yellow area called gaps. So if I have any geometry in this area, it's not going to get recorded on the surface of the low poly. So this little green bit right here is going to be missed, and what you're going to end up having is a horrible line. I'll show you pictures of that later, don't worry about it too much. But you can see, whereas before with this one, you can see that the frontal distance is reaching all the way around the circumference of the mesh. On this one, you can see it's only capturing straight up from those distances, and it's missing all of the corners, unfortunately. So let's give that one a go. So I've set up a planar bake, and this one is called chain. So let's just let that load. Come on, Maya. I turned off Arnold so you'd load faster. I should have really just left all these scenes open, but yeah. Cool. Let's have a look. Okay, cool. So this is our planar bake we've got set up. So it's quite easy. We've just got a low poly, which is this white piece here. So this is also UV'd. I'll show that as well. Just loading. Here we go. So these are the UVs for our low poly. Let me just zoom out. Oh. Okay, this is actually incorrect. I must have not saved it. Basically, without redoing it, it should actually look something more along the lines of that. So I've already exported it, but when we go into Substance Painter, you'll see it looking like that. I must have just not saved this. Cool. But anyway, don't worry about that. Like I said, we're focusing on baking, not UV so much. Let me just turn off the UV editor. Cool. So this is our low poly. This is our high poly, the chain. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be baking this chain data all the way flat onto this low poly. And then we've got the top of our sandwich here, which is this red piece. And this is going to be basically our frontal distance the further out it gets. Now, like I was saying before with the hamburger, you don't actually want it to be all the way out here. This is just for demonstration purposes. What it's actually going to look like is this. So you want it purely as tight between the model as you can, because I only want to capture this small distance. The way I did that actually, just to show you, is if we go into the side view, you can see here, what I've done is I've literally just dropped this down as close as I can get it before touching. So probably something, I don't want to go something like that, but you know, just something comfortable like there, just give it a bit of space. So that's how I've ended up with that result like that. So sometimes you can see right there, it looks like it's clipping through, but I've physically checked that it's not clipping, so don't worry about that. Yeah, like when you zoom out, that's just camera settings. Cool, so this is what we're baking now. And what's going to happen is, just like this arrow right here, we're just going to be baking straight down rather than at angles. So let's show that off. So we'll open a new painter scene. Painter. Oh, I'm nerdily excited about bent normals. That's that they've added that and height maps in Painter. I'm gonna enjoy testing and playing around with that. Okay, so same process. So you'll be a little bit more familiar with this process now. So we add the file. This one we're going to be doing chain planar bake. That's the one. Chain low. So this is just that flat white piece. 2K resolution we want our textures at. Also going to talk about this a little bit later. Normal map format. There's DirectX and OpenGL. Don't worry about that for now. I'll explain that. And then it's all the same settings anyway, so we just hit OK. Cool. And then we've got a 3D model here. And is it going to do the painful thing? Yeah, it's just loading in all my stuff still, so we'll just ignore that. I've got a lot of stuff on ArtStation and Gumroad, which I've got installed like as a separate library on here, like smart materials and all sorts of stuff. So I've just got to give it a chance. Cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do bake. Let's play around with this. So yeah, 2K. That's what we set. Let's have a look at some of these. I'm going to turn off height, roughness, and metallic because we don't need those. I've already shown how they affect textures later on. And then we're just going to bake this. Let's roll. So yep, triangles again. Something's wrong. So we'll bake this at 2K. Okay, and then we'll add chain high. Wicked. We're not using cage, so rear distance isn't going to make a difference to us really. The chain is a little bit below, but don't worry about that. Frontal distance is the one we might have to push up and down like this. Just stick that back to 0.01. Don't worry about some of this stuff. That's fine for now. And then we'll just go. I'm not going to bake. I'll bake ID, but I won't bake some. Actually, no, screw it. I'll just bake them all, just for fun. I love baking. It's fun. Cool. So some wicked things are happening. But it doesn't look particularly good. So this is the stage of baking where you can bake, but there's loads of problems. Okay, so I know what the first thing that I've done wrong is. The first thing I've done wrong is that I've still got average normals turned on. Yeah, you can see right here, I've got the tick box. So what's happening right now, if I just close this, what's happening is it's taking the normals of the chain at the angles and it's baking them all across. When I don't want that, I just want them baking straight down. The reason why I've picked this chain is because I think it's a good example of a trim sheet where it just endlessly, I haven't made this tiling, but you can have this endlessly tiling. So yeah, we're just going to go into here and we're just going to turn off average normal. So now it's baking flat down, and let's just bake it again and see what happens. I love it when it does that. It looks so cool. Okay, so we've got a chain. It just looks a bit funky. Now, the reason why it looks funky is because I really shouldn't close my scenes. Basically, before, if you remember the red plane that we had above the low poly, that is too close to the low poly at the moment. It's like basically right next to the low poly. What we need to do is raise the frontal distance higher so it encompasses the whole chain. A good way of actually showing that as well is if you look at the ID map, you can see that it's baking the green, but we're not getting any of the red of the higher piece of the hamburger. So when we start seeing red come through here, you know that you've baked the entire full chain. So we'll just go back. So yeah, it's literally cutting off the center of the chain right now of those vertical links crossing over. So what we're just going to do is just going to raise this frontal distance. You can slide it up and down, but something I like to do is just delete zeros or add zeros. So let's bake that now. Let's see what happens. So if we see red, which we just did in the ID, oh, I think we've gone a bit too far there. Now we're getting even worse results. What's happening there? That's not good. Max frontal distance. Have I gone too high? Maybe it should be. Let's just do the rear distance as well. Don't know what's going on there. That's not very good, is it? No, it's definitely the frontal distance. Okay, so you can see that as I've just changed that, nothing's actually happened. So what I'm just going to do is put this back to where it was because that's obviously not the problem. So let's just drop this down a little bit. So let's stick it on, let's try 0.5. Let's give that a go. And I'm just going to turn off some of these other ones as well because otherwise we're going to take twice as long. So the only one I actually care about right now is ID and normal. So I'm just going to bake those two. Why are you not baking my sandwich? Okay, let's go back to 0.01. Okay, so it seems to be working there. So let's just go to 2. Yeah, let's just keep baking. So this is just sometimes how it goes. So for every single mesh you have, this is just going to be different. Oh, so we're getting a bit more of the chain here now. Yeah, so I just went way too high. So you can see that a little bit more of the chain is coming on the vertical pieces now. So if we just keep going point by point. So let's try 4. So yeah, here we go. Here we go, we're getting there. So we're nearly there. Our frontal distance is just a tiny bit still too low. And if we go into ID, you'll see that I'm still not getting that red through from the top of the hamburger. So let's just keep going. I swear I had it on 0.05 before. Okay, I think I know what's happening. I think what's happening is it's taking the it's basically replacing the chain with that top red piece. So the chain is there, but unfortunately it's getting completely bleached out by the top red piece. I think the reason we have to fix that is a thing called by mesh name. Let's just see if that works. So this is a thing I'll go into a little bit more later, but basically you can match based on the naming convention. No, so I haven't set up the naming convention. Okay, that's fine. So this is the thing about baking, right? It's just problematic. So rather than me showing you an art and crafts where it's all just perfect, it's actually kind of good that something's gone wrong because now I can show you my way of fixing it. Just loading up the scene again. So there's nothing wrong with my low poly. The issue here is my high poly. So we're just going to fix that. So just hide this. Okay, so what we've got here is that... Oh, still loading. Okay, so the issue we have here is that it's basically just doing this. It's baking red to, like, just from plane to plane. So what we need to do is we need to set up a naming convention. You can see here actually that I've got everything either named chain underscore low or chain underscore high. And that's to, in Substance Painter, if I just jump into there, when you go into bake maps, you can see down here it's looking for these names. Low poly mesh suffix, high poly mesh suffix. It's looking for anything underscore low and anything underscore high. And when you go into match by mesh name, it's going to, instead of it just baking everything together, it's going to start baking specifically those names against each other. Cool, so if we just go into here. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to match these up. So right now it's going to bake these two together. We need to tie these two together instead. What I might just do is just delete this. Kind of struggling at the moment. just hide that. Yeah, we can just bake the chain like that. The reason actually you want to get, the reason why I've got this red piece in is because when you bake the green and the red together, what you're going to be able to say is, hey, I want to get rid of all the red and just keep the green, which we're basically baking a mask. So we're going to mask out the red area later, and we're just going to keep the green. So that's why I'm trying to get this in for perspective. Just trying to remember how to do it though. Let's take this apart. And let's just bake that together. Or even, actually, I've got a good idea. Let's just stick this lower. We just stick this at the exact same height as the low poly. And just leave that in there. That should be fine now. Wicked. Yeah, let's just do that. There is a way you can do it as a sandwich, but just for the sake of time, we'll just do it like this for now. The good way, like I said, the good way of doing it with the red up high is that you can then work out your frontal distance better. Okay, so I'm just going to re-export this. Just freeze all my transformations and make sure. Oh, another thing about baking is that when you export your models, you want to make sure that all of your pivots, your origins, are in the center of each model, so these are exactly the same between low and high. And even with these ones, they're all the same. Oh, so this one, there we go. You see that? That's different. So what you'd actually want to do there is just change that and snap that back to the center of the scene, just to make sure it's consistent. So that's not helpful. Okay, so just delete all the history on that, and let's re-export this. I've got a shortcut for that. And let's just stick that in here. And we'll just export it back over our high. Yep, we want to replace that. Cool. Okay, I'll just minimize that this time. Okay, and then we're just going to replace that with this one. Okay, so fingers crossed this should just work now. And I shouldn't need this mesh name thing, which I wanted to get into later anyway, so let's just bake that. Wicked! That's exactly what we wanted. Right, that's what I would now define as a successful bake. And when we go into the ID map, you can see here we've got the chain which is green, and we've got the bit that we want to remove as red. So that's absolutely wicked. Okay, at this point, that's when I'd maybe start thinking about baking all of the other maps now that I know all these settings are right. So I'd come back in and bring all these back in, rather than, you know, when you're test baking, you really just want to do the essential stuff that you're trying to get out. And that's actually perfect because this is actually a better example of those other maps. So let's just quickly flick through those. So we got our normal map, which that's come out wicked. Let's just go back into just this view, zoom in a bit. So we got our normal map, world space normals, different type of normal map, your ID map, which was already shown you, ambient occlusion. So you can see there's a little bit of grain here. We'll talk about that later. But essentially, you can see that light is being occluded in these areas, especially underneath the chain. A light's definitely hitting the top of this chain, whereas compared to here, it's being missed. So that's cool. Curvature, wicked. So we can actually see proper curvature now. So you can see these areas are convexed, and these bits are concave. Yeah, because we're baking it flat. I mean, technically on the chain, the whole thing's convex, but actually, well, the insides are concaved. But yeah, you can see now we're actually getting some definition on our curvature map. If you're also wondering about these, this like fragmenting here, what happens is when you bake in here, it automatically triangulates the mesh, the high poly, and because of that, it's causing us problems. But I'll talk about that later as well. So don't worry too much about this. Just remember that the only thing that's important to remember here is that the vertex edges, the normals, the normal vertices, the normal jeez, the vertex normals on your high poly matter when baking your low poly. There we go, we got to there in the end. Cool. And then what else have we got? Curvature, position. Okay, so position's pretty boring. Don't worry about that too much, because it was a flat. Thickness, that one's pretty cool. So it's basically said here that, hey, this area is completely not thick at all, and this area's actually got some thickness to it, so that's coming up black. Cool, so we're just going to quickly turn this into something useful, which we can then export. So what we need to do is we just need to quickly turn on, where's it gone? We need to add where's it gone? Opacity. Have they changed it? Oh, let's add ambient occlusion as well. Coat opacity. Oh yeah, they've changed the shader, so it's called coat opacity now. believe. Yeah, I just want to check the shader. I believe that they've recently changed it. ASM Metal Rough outdated. Okay, I'm just gonna, for the sake of demonstration, I'm just gonna change this to the one we're normally used to, which is PBR Melt Rough with alpha blending. Just to quickly explain what these are. A good way of explaining it is I believe some rats can see infrared, humans can't see infrared ultraviolet, and butterflies can see ultraviolet light. So a good way of understanding these is that imagine you're swapping eyeballs with a butterfly or with a rat. If some of these can see infrared, some of these can see ultraviolet. In the sense of games design, some of these can see alpha and opacity, some of these can't. So I'm just swapping to alpha blending so we can make sure we get that up. And then what I'm just quickly going to do is I'm going to go into our layer stack. I'm going to create a folder. And in this folder, I'm just going to add a mask with color selection. So I'm masking off this folder with a color selection. And just double click on this, and the options aren't coming up. Of course they're not. Where are the options? There we go. Got there in the end. Cool, let's just drag this out. So these are the options for this specific thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick the red color and we're going to remove it and turn that into the alpha. So what I'm just going to do is going to pick a color, and you can see it's automatically bringing up my ID map. So I've just got to pick one of these colors. There's only two, so I'm just going to pick this one, the red one. So now this folder is masking away the red. Cool, so we can just go out of that. Now we just need a material in here. So if we just add a fill layer, and on this fill layer, we're just going to turn off everything except the opacity. And if we drive that up, why is that not working? Oh, if I chuck that in there. Okay, that is in there. I think I might have got these. Let's just have a look at these. Oh yeah, I've got the wrong one on. Because these textures channels can change depending on your shader. See, you've just put up a question there, Sam. I'll get to that in a second. Okay, cool. And then now if we go back into our layers and just make sure that this, yep, so just turn on opacity for that. There we go. Wicked. So there you go. Perfect. That's exactly what we need. And then if you just imagine that this move, if you just repeat this endlessly to the left and the right, you can see what we've done is we've just baked a chain. But in reality, it's not a chain. It's literally just something that's completely flat. That's actually what it looks like. So this is the beauty of texture baking. And if I get around to putting on my my favorite HDRI now, yeah, soft front, two backs, whatever it's called, just loading, wicked. You can see now the normals and the ambient occlusion and everything is just working together nicely, and we've just baked a chain onto a flat surface. Wicked. So that's a planar bake. Now if I just go, just for demonstration, I'm just going to show you the other, what would have happened if I'd done the other baking method. I'm just going to turn on average normals, the one we did for the edges, and let's just bake that. So hopefully what I want it to show is that it skews a bit. No, to be honest, it hasn't shown that, but I'll show you examples of that later. But cool, so you baked a chain. Well done. So we're getting to the you're basically intermediate at this point. But so we baked two things, right? Let me just answer Sam's question. So Sam's question, for people that can't see it, is what extra considerations would I need to take into account if I wanted to bake textures and use it in VR? To be honest, nothing that I can think of really, because VR is more just about having two cameras perceiving a scene, whereas a normal video game is just having one camera perceiving a scene. I honestly like, and don't take this on face value because I don't know a lot about VR, you know, so I'm no expert. I'm not trying to claim to be. But a VR engine, real-time engine, is literally just the same as any other video game engine. So I don't see why there would be much differences at all, if any. It's more just about setting up your objects and their materials in a scene. This is just a way. I guess if it was like a UE5 scene, which is more like with nanite and you know, the whole point of this whole baking thing, like I said, is because you need low geometry. If you can use nanite, you probably just use the high poly in a game engine anyway, because it will just change the resolution for you. So yeah, baking's becoming a bit of the thing of the past now since UE5, but it's good to know. Cool. So let's discard that. So we've successfully baked a chain. It didn't go perfectly, but we did it, and that's what's important. I would like to get the hamburger thing working because that's a nice example of showing the frontal distance, but doesn't matter, don't worry about it too much. So let's move on with the presentation. So what are the pros and cons of baking with a cage or baking without a cage, or as I was calling it, planar baking? So, just to say again that these images have been taken from Leonardo Lezzi's document. I've removed his annotations, but if you're serious about baking, I 100% think you should buy this. It's absolutely amazing. So here on the left, you can see that we've got perfect bevels. This was the first bake we did with the cube, and on the left you can see that we've got perfect details, like the chain. These are baked straight flat down. The problem with this is they both have pros and cons. So because we're baking at like the soft edge angles, you can see that our details here that are flat on surfaces are skewed, whereas on the planar bake that we did, they're all completely flat, and we've captured the normal map really nicely there. And then on the flip side, this left one has got the edges really nicely, but just like I showed you before in this image, because it's missing these corners, what's happening on this one is that it's having issues filtering the corners. So just this little bit I've just zoomed in up here as well. You can see that these transitions between these two directions, the horizontal and the vertical, they're blending really nicely on this left one, but they're kind of stuttering a little bit on this one and causing you projection errors. So you know two types of baking, but how do we get around it? Well, these are the problems, right? So this is exactly what I've just explained. You can see here, actually, this is a better demonstration. Leonardo Lezzi's pictures, like I said before. You've got this weird line going around the edge of the planar bake, and that's because of that missed section. Whereas here, this is what I was trying to show on the chain when I just did that last bake at the end. The details are getting skewed because the normals are averaged at an angle rather than the normals being flat and straight on here. So, yep, another side-on example of the same thing. You can see it's getting missed here on the edges, which is why it's coming up with that problem there. And right here, the details, so you can see he's got, this is, if you imagine that this is the high poly, right, this green line. If you imagine that this is some form of bolt, when the high poly, this is our frontal distance, or the cage, is getting projected onto the low poly, you can see that it's getting captured through the soft angle. So it's getting skewed there, but on here it's going perfectly down. So we've got two bakes, but unfortunately you can't really apply two bakes to a material in an engine or whatever. So what can we do with this? Well, the trick is to use the best of both worlds. We combine them. So we've got our average normals one here, and we've got our planar straight one for the details here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to mask them off. And you combine them together, and wow, there you go. Isn't that beautiful? Now that is a perfect bake. So if you can get to this stage, I would consider you an intermediate baker, because you can now perfectly bake objects. And the way he's combined this mask is he's either done it in Substance Designer here, Leonardo Lezzi, or he's just quickly done it in Photoshop. I'm going to have a slide later quickly on masking, but basically all you need to understand is that you can combine them together using a mask. So wicked. That's what we would use in a game engine. Yes, I know, that was a very complicated process. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about problems. Okay, so when you bake, I've seen so many students bake now, and there's just so many problems. And this is not any type of factual thing, but I personally believe 80% of your problems are going to be UV related, and 20% of your problems are probably going to be more related to the projection settings that we saw, all those menus in Substance Painter. The reason why 80% of the problems are UVs is because people don't like UV mapping. They find it a massive pain. And because of that, they try and do the bare minimum of UV mapping. They don't learn a whole lot. They just learn enough to get by, and then they miss out loads of problems. I actually love UV mapping. I'm probably better at it than baking. I just love the technical side of it, the way my brain's wired. But it's one of those stages that people just don't care about. So I'm just going to talk about the most common UV problems if you're having baking problems. So you've got bad shell resolution. Your bake is only as good as the size of your texture. So I just baked all those in 2K. If you're baking in 256 pixels, it's going to be, really terrible pixelated quality. Shell orientation is an important thing. Pixels are squares, so if you're baking, at funny angles, your UVs, you're going to have some weird artifacting on the edges. I'll show you an example of that, don't worry about that. And then no padding, which we'll get onto another slide. So this is an example of bad resolution. So you can see here, I can't remember who did this. I think might be Leonardo who put this one. No, sorry, Carlos, I think. He's got this exact same high poly, but what he's done is he's just made it smaller and smaller. And you can see as the resolution gets worse, you get lots of less detail. So if you imagine that I baked this at 2K right next to it, it'd be like really smooth edges and circles and stuff like that. So just keep in mind, if you have bad resolution, your bake's going to come out bad. Okay, bad orientation. So here is another example that Carlos put up, and in the top here you can see that these are his. This is the way he's basically textured this piece of geometry, and he's textured these hazard grid lines at a 45-degree angle. Whereas down here, what he's done is he's textured them completely straight, um, and when he's then rotated it in engine or on the shells and applied it, these edges are really nice and smooth, whereas these ones are pixelated. The con to this though is, as you can see, that this takes up a very small amount of texture space. It only takes up what, like the top sixth, whereas this takes up the entire 0 to 1 of that area. So this, just keep in mind that this applies to baking. So if you're doing stuff like this in this top one, you're baking some really funnily, weirdly rotated shells, you're going to start getting some weird pixelating on the edges, just like this. Whereas if you just rotate them, simple UV rotate, you might find that your edges start becoming really clean. So yep, just keep that in mind. Okay, and then this is an example. So here we have a combination of these top two things. You've got some bad resolution here, and what he's done between these two images, is that you can see he's got probably something like a 512 map here, and then what he's tried to do to fix the problem is he's just increased the resolution to like 1K. It hasn't fixed this problem. What it's done is it's just halved the problem. So whereas this is quite noticeable, this is just half as noticeable. The trade-off for that is that you've literally quadrupled the size of your texture, and you haven't fixed the problem. The reason this is happening is because of no padding, which we'll get into on the next slide. But yeah, so just keep this in mind. Bad resolution, your bake's only as good as the size of your normal maps or whatever maps. Bad orientation, pixels on a texture are squares, so if you start rotating them against those squares, you're going to start getting weird edging. And then no padding, which we'll go into now based on that last example. Cool. Cool. So, why do you need padding between your shells? So in game engines, there's a thing called mipmaps. I just saw your question, Seamus, so I'll get to that in a bit. So why do you need padding on mipmaps? So basically, in game engines, let's say you've authored a 2K texture, like we just baked, and we put it in the game engine. If you zoom out really far away from that texture, and it takes up like a very tiny, let's say this model is now 50 meters away, you don't need a full 2000 pixel texture to now texture that model. You just need a very small one, like even this size is probably like 64 pixels. So what game engines do is no matter what texture you load in, it will create lower versions of itself automatically just by halving and halving and halving and halving. And this is where shell padding comes in. So this is an example. This is from Polycount. So this is the original texture, which is at 512. This white line is the edge of that texture, the shell edge. Oh, it's got a bit of padding there, 4 pixels. And you can see as the mipmaps continue to degrade and degrade, what's happening is these shells are actually blending over into each other quite rigorously. So we need space between our shells, and basically the thing you can see here is that he's put a little gap between them, and this is becoming less of an issue. The point he's trying to make with these colors is that the colors will start bleeding onto each other. Yeah, you can see here, as the resolution gets worse, these colors start bleeding onto each other. Okay, let me just have a look at Seamus' question. Does it cause problems in the baked textures if you shrink the UVs of the models themselves, even if you've got like 4K maps? So let's say, so this is our texture, 512. If you shrink the UVs of the model themselves, yeah, so your UVs are just a fragment of your overall texture. So if I've got, I mean, you can see it here, this little 64 pixel. If my UV shell is 64 pixels big on this 512 texture, that one face of that polygon is only going to be as strong as that resolution. So you might be baking like a 2K texture or whatever, but if your UV shells are scaled so small that they're only taking up like 32 pixel space, your bake is only going to be good on that face of that polygon as 32 by 32 pixels. So yeah, it does matter. So, but yeah, increasing the resolution on your textures, like I said on the last slide, it doesn't fix all your problems. It's more about like consistency and things. But yeah, consistency between shells is called texel density, but that's UV, and I'm not touching that. That's a very deep subject, but just to mention that. Cool. Okay, so moving on. So here we've got the same problem as we saw on the first slides. This guy's baked a model and he's like, help please internet. He's got these weird edges and he's showing his low and high poly. So why is this happening? So this is an update that Carlos put up in his guides. So here on the left we have an example of two UV shells with a gap between them, and we've got two UV shells with no gap between them. And what happens is when you take, let's just imagine that this is a color texture, just a color map. When you take that on the model, you'll actually start seeing bleed over from the opposing faces, and these might be on completely different parts of your model. So you've got a bit of red pulling over into the blue and a bit of blue pulling over into the red. And when you add a bit of separation between your UV shell borders, you don't get that bleeding effect. And you got to remember that this gets worse and worse the lower the bitmap gets. So when you bitmap down to like 32 pixels, this gets absolutely terrible. Anyway, the reason why this relates to baking is because this bleed over is what's causing this weird edging. So you can see here, this weird edging is right here. And this is a Blender model, I believe, and he's got no gaps here between these two UV shells, the left and the right, and it's causing this horrible dotted line effect, which is this jagged line here. You can see because the UVs aren't straight, like I said, with the pixels, it's causing this artifacting. And when he splits them on his hard edge, which we'll also go into a bit later about splitting on hard edges, he doesn't get that problem anymore. So this is honestly one of the biggest problems you'll see with baking, and the problem isn't the baking, the problem is the UVs, right? Cool. And then poly count. This is what I personally do. The distance between this gap depends on your texture resolution. So if you're baking a 1K texture, you should have 8 pixels distance minimum between these two shells, and then this doubles and halves depending on the texture you go up and down. So if you're going up to a 4K texture, you would want a 32 pixel gap padding between your shells, and if you're going up to even 8K, it'd be 64. The lowest you'd be able to go is 128 pixels, which would be a 1 pixel distance. Cool. So Sam's just asked a question: how do you go about baking our animated textures? I'll be honest, I have absolutely no clue. Yeah, no clue with that one. You'll have to look into that one. That's a big brain question that I'm not intellectual enough to know the answer to. So moving on. 20% projection settings. So this is just talking about the rest of the errors that aren't UV related. So the biggest issue is when your projection cage overlaps with itself. So that's what it looks like when you're trying to bake a character, and this is a bit of a crude model, but you can see here that his frontal distance is so extreme. That's what's happening. Let's just take like this ring finger here. If you think the frontal distance is pushing out here, it's pushing so far that it's pushing into this finger, and then the details of this finger are being baked onto the wrong finger, and that's why you're getting this weird effect. What does this look like if you weren't having this problem? Well, you can see here someone's baked some lips and there isn't any issue whatsoever. You're not seeing the bottom lip appear on the top lip and vice versa. So we're just going to quickly talk about why this is happening. So you can see here, this is the planar baking one I was talking about earlier. And I think this is another Carlos image. And you can also see there are some gaps. But yeah, it's exactly the same as I was just saying here. This face that we're baking, this is the top of the frontal distance, and this face we're baking, this is the top of the frontal distance. So what's happening is if there's a high poly in these yellow areas and it sits right here, and we've pushed our frontal distance up here and up here, it's going to capture this detail in this section on both this face and both on this face. So yeah, it will get recorded here and it will get recorded here if there's anything right here. So there's ways of getting around this. The first way is to split your bakes into multiple groups, and this is the type of thing I was doing with the chain earlier, which I was showing you with the suffix. You can see he's done it here actually, underscore body high, underscore body low. So when he's baked here, he's said that he only wants this body piece and this body piece low and high to bake onto each other, and he only wants this bolt and this bolt to bake onto each other. So this has its own cage and that has its own cage, so they're not affecting each other in any way. So long story short, you might have to do multiple bakes, or if your baking software allows it, you can just do a bit of fiddling with the names and the import and some of the settings, and you might just be able to do it straight away. Another reason why people love Marmoset. But yeah, you can do it in Painter. So let's have a look at that. So right here, this is the explanation. This is something I crudely made. So we've got our low poly here, which is this flat plane. And just like the chain, we're going to be baking down these three things onto that flat piece. So this is a very simple example. So just imagine this is some sort of bolt, some sort of detail that we're baking onto a flat alpha. So you can see example low, I've named that this low piece. And then what I have here is these three pieces, the red, the blue, and the green, they're all in a group called example high. So when I take this into Substance Painter, it's gonna, and I switch it to by mesh name instead of always, the matching, it's going to be looking for these two names and the suffix of underscore low and underscore high. And then if you need to name things past that point inside the group, you can just add it on to the end. So that's a simple example. It's only going to be baking example high onto example low. So before, if you didn't have match by mesh name on, then it would just been baking everything onto everything, just like this example here. So this example here. So this is literally just baking everything on top of each other, whereas this is what we're doing with splitting it up. Cool. Okay, so this is a more complicated example. This is something I did at the end of my bachelor's degree. So what we've got is I've got separate parts of a pillar, each with different colors. And what I want is I don't want like pieces like these, let's say these green pieces. I don't want them necessarily causing projection errors on this like pinky piece. So what I've done is I've said I want this low poly piece to bake directly to that green low poly piece. I want this piece down here to bake specifically to that one, so they don't start intersecting with each other and causing problems. You're going to get some serious intersection errors with these cutout pieces because the frontal distance will start projecting on top of each other. So just back in the outliner, you can see here pillar all low and pillar all high are the top of each group, and then in between that I've got the same names, pillar top, but they've just got the low and the high suffix changed. Just to say, if you want to save yourself a bit of effort, just keep it with a lowercase l and a lowercase h. For some reason, my brain just likes seeing the capital letters, so I changed this all to capitals, capital L's and H's, but then I have to change that in Substance Painter, so save yourself effort by not bothering and being strange like me. Cool, so these specific pieces are baking specifically to each other rather than all smashing together. So yeah, bake by mesh name. Okay, let's look at cheating. Not a good thing. This is how let's say you do have projection errors and you're running out of time and you don't have time to do multiple bakes and combine them in Photoshop and all this nonsense. Well, you've got to remember that textures, that baking, you're baking onto textures. So if you know what the original color of a texture is, then you can, like this is in Photoshop, I've just quickly taken this. Let's say I had a problem on top of this baked texture. I can literally just erase it with a paintbrush, as long as I've got the base color. And then this is from Polycount, and it's just someone mentioning that he did a bake which was mirrored, so the left and the right side of this is flipped. And he's got a line going down the center where he's flipped the UVs, and that was him with the base color of 127 for the normal map, whereas if you use 128, which is the base color for the normal map with 255 on the blue, he's not getting that error line. So long story short, the point I'm trying to make here is that with normals, just make sure you're picking the right flipping color, otherwise you're going to start causing yourself problems again. And this applies to the other maps as well. If you've got thickness or curvature, the base value is going to be 50% gray. Like I said, if something's concave, then it'll go white, and if something's convex, it'll go black. If you're having a problem, you could just paint back 50% gray on top of it and just cheat it away. But yeah, I don't recommend doing this. I just want you to remember that you can cheat and you can quickly fix something just in Photoshop or something. But this is only if you're running out of time. I don't recommend doing this, generally speaking. Okay, now we're just quickly going to compare some of the different baking software. So just some quick mentions. XNormal is a free baking software. It's what a lot of people used to use back in the day, and it was more for just getting out the normal and the AO. So the one thing I want to note is that it hasn't got a 3D viewer, so you can't, like in Painter where we can see what's going on. You're baking purely based on the texture itself, so it's a bit of a pain. Painter has rear distance settings, and Marvelous Toolbag. No, Marmoset Toolbag. I keep getting those initials confused. You can is really fancy. Basically, this is why I bake personally in it. You can actually edit the normals and the cage offset. I'll get into that in a bit because I need to do this last bake. So this is what we're going to be baking. I basically at one point I made this just to test myself. It's a bit of a struggle. But this is our low poly with the cage, and this is the high poly we're going to be baking. So you can see here that we've got some really nice bevels, which I've colored yellow on the ID map. And we've got some flat details across it. which are these crazy shapes that I just went nuts. And to be honest, I didn't need to do all of this. I could have probably just done like an eighth of this cube, just one segment, an eighth, and just baked that, and I would have got the same result because a lot of these details are just the same in just different ways. Something else I want to point out is that I've got a big sphere here sticking out and a big sphere here sticking in. The one when baking this, it's going to be a bit of a problem. The one on the inside isn't going to matter so much in Marmoset Toolbag because it doesn't have, like I was talking about, rear and frontal distances are different between these software. But I'll probably have problems baking this one, which I'd have to basically do a separate bake for and then edit it after into the normal map or whatever. But yeah, just bear in mind that this is going to be sticking out of our cage. As you can see here, this is our cage. So we're not probably going to be able to get this perfect. So I actually went across and I wanted to work out, which is the best baking software and things like this. So I actually just baked that asset in everything I could. So here I've got some comparisons of me baking a normal map. On the left here is XNormal. In the middle you've got Substance Painter, and then on the right you've got Marmoset Toolbag. And just showing some differences between them. I didn't notice really any differences at all on this one. I think they came out completely fine. Oh, and just to say, I'll talk about this a bit later as well with samples and stuff, but I've really ramped up the quality of the bake settings for these. I wanted to get the best bakes I could. Ambient occlusion, so XNormal Painter Toolbag, you can see that I'm not getting a lot of difference between normal and Painter, really. You can see there's a bit of a shading difference in the way it's calculating the AO. But when it comes to between Toolbag and Painter, you can see that this AO color for this dipped in sphere, it's actually coming out a little bit lighter. So I think the way it grades the AO in Marmoset Toolbag is a little bit deeper across the values. Curvature, similar story as the last one. Something else I would want to point out is in the XNormal one, you can see that we were getting that problem with like triangulation that we had earlier, except this is slightly different. It looks like hard edge is being recorded on this one. And then thickness is a bit of a pain. It came out completely garbage for me. Like there's not great values on XNormal for this one. There's not a lot of settings for it. I don't think either. I can't remember. I'm not too clued up on XNormal baking. I've done it quite a little bit, but enough to get by. Painter came out quite nice, and then with the Marmoset Toolbag one, this actually came out flipped, and I had to invert the colors, so these were all completely opposite. I've just flipped these in Photoshop. But yeah, the consistency between these two when you flip this one, these are pretty good. So cool. What's next? Okay, so from this point in the presentation, this is all just advanced stuff. So what we're going to do quickly is we're just going to bake that. We're going to go into and bake that last complicated one. So let me find, so this is Marmoset Toolbag 3. I do have 4 installed, but I've got all my HDRIs and I've got a load of them installed in this one, and the settings are basically the same. The only reason people really use Toolbag 4 mainly is because you can do PBR texturing in it now, whereas this was normally just for baking and rendering at its heart. Cool, so let me just find the bake. And what we're going to do is we're just going to drag in the low poly. So cube low. Here we go. Oh. Wicked. So this is our low poly cube. And we're going to bake this. So we'll just drag in the high poly as well. High. Let's drag that one in. Cool. So you can see that this is them stacked on top of each other now. The reason why we're getting this this edging here is because I've beveled those corners right. So if I just hide the low, you can see that it's actually sitting below the mesh. It's very bright in this scene. Why is it so bright? Okay, I'm using some weird. Let's just have a look at for a different HDRI. So this has got a bit of red in it, so it's the same thing, same principle, different baking software. You really just don't want anything with colors when you're baking, or even texturing. So I've actually stolen all of the HDRIs from Substance Painter here and big brained it and just imported them into Toolbag because I really love this soft front backs one. I just think it's wicked. Okay, it's a little bit bright, so we'll just turn it down a bit. Let's just stick it on 0.35. Cool. And then I can rotate that just like in Painter. Cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start baking. So another thing I love about this software is it's got a little toast icon for when you want to make a bake group. So we'll click the toast icon, and then you can see here it's got a bake group and it's got a high and a low. So it's literally as simple as this. We're going to drag the high into the high group, and we're going to drag the low into the low group. Wicked. Let's see. So, yep, so that's all fine. I'll just close those. That's fine. So when I click on the baker, it comes up with all the settings for the baking. I'm actually just going to turn off the high so we can just see the low. Why is that gone? Why is it taking away both of them? What are you doing? Where's my low polygon? Oh, it's hiding it. Okay, we'll come back to that. Okay, it's definitely there. But why are you invisible? Oh, okay, I've turned off the viewing icon in the layer below. Cool, so we got it back now. Okay, so in this baker group here, just above the baker group, yeah, this is giving us all of our actual settings. You can see here, just like in Substance Painter, I can configure whatever maps I want. I can add more if I want. If I just go into configure, I can add all of these. So I would add all of the ones that I would then need in Substance Painter. So I'm going to need, yeah, I'm actually just going to add them now for the sake of it. So I'm going to need position, curvature. You can actually bake concave and convex separately here. Thickness, which is the one I'd have to reverse later in like Photoshop. Ambient occlusion, material IDs, and then annoyingly, Marmoset Toolbag, it paints IDs as like not the colors, so I'm going to have to want to bake colors as well. Albedo, that's the one. So I'll directly bake the colors. Which one of these? Yep, that should be good to go. Let me just double check. Yep, wicked. And then when I've got these bake maps, I would then import them into my painter scene and then just apply them to the low poly. Okay, so just like before, I'm not going to turn all these on. I'm just going to turn on the ones I need. So ambient occlusion normally takes the longest. So we'll just turn on albedo to get the colors, the ID map. I'll show you why that's different, and the normals. Okay, so let me just have a drink. Let's have a look. So let's bake something first. If you bake something, at least you've got a starting point. So let's see. First, I need to set my output of where this texture is going to go. So let me just quickly. Is that? Yeah, that's the right directory. And I don't want to bake a PSD. That's no good to me. So I'm just going to bake it as a PNG. Cool. Oh, do I have to name it something? Let's just name it cube, difficult cube, or hard cube, or something. Cool. So then they'll all be saved as hard cube underscore normals object position, etc. Cool. So now I should be able to bake something. Set to 2K resolution. Let's just have a look if there's anything else. Okay, so padding size. So just like I said before with padding, I'm going to set custom padding amount. And because this is a 2K map, I'm going to set it to padding of 16 pixels. So it's going to dilate over the edge of the UV shell by 16 pixels. And then if we go, if the maps get worse, it won't be affected. So texture dilation, which is also a setting in Painter. Just checking. Yep, that should basically be good to go. You can go into the individual maps like we did in Painter, and you can see you can flip Y and dither it and stuff like that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. There's no settings for that. You can just change the name. So let's bake it. Let's roll. Let's see what happens. Okay, nothing's happened. Let's hit preview. Let's see what happens. Hide. Oh, okay. No, I think it's worked. Let me just make sure. Yeah, so my high poly. Yeah, so it has worked. I just hadn't previewed it. I hadn't applied the textures onto the mesh. So let's have a look. So if I just turn off my low poly, this is what my high poly looks like. And just to say, you can see that something changes there. So this is actually applied to the low poly now. So I have successfully baked this. The problem is that we've got problems. So this is the sphere that's sticking outside the cage. That's going to be a problem. And we've got all the same problems we had before. So you can see here, I've got an option here called smooth cage. Now, you might be familiar with that. That's actually the same as average normals on. You're smoothing out, like the softer vertice edges, you're actually smoothing out the distance. So you can see here that my details are really wonky, but my edges are really nice. So yeah, you can see a perfect example, really wonky. And then when I change the lighting as well. But my ID map's baked fine, so that's a good sign. So what we're going to do is I'm just quickly going to show you how you can do both of those bakes, average normals on and off, in Toolbag in one go. It's really wicked. So if you go into the settings for low, you've got two things here. You've got paint offset and you've got paint skew. Paint offset lets you change the frontal distance specifically for an area of that mesh, and paint skew lets you adjust the normals from being straight to being bent. So you're kind of transitioning between hard to soft. So I'm going to show you paint skew first. It's really cool. So it'll show you the UVs, and I just want to make sure that this is the same resolution as my document. So we're baking in 2K, so I want to set that to 2K. Just make sure that's saved. Cool. And you can see now when I clicked on this, all these little lines are coming up, like little hairs. So this is actually a perfect example. If I close this, yeah, they still come up. So you can see when we're baking from the high poly to the low, it's not baking flat down straight, it's baking at an angle, and because of it, it's getting captured at an angle. You can see here on this circular one, it's getting baked at a pretty quite a steep angle. So anyway, yeah, going back into this cool setting, what you can do is paint a white to black value on this map, and it will transition that area between soft and hard, or average normals and average normals off. So I've got my brush set to black here, and you can change it there. And what I'm just going to do is going to paint a nice little circle around here. And then when I let go, that's when it's going to update the bake. So you can see as I'm touching some of these, they're going yellow to red. So when I let go here, hopefully it should just go whoop, and there you go, fixed. I know, it's that easy. So you don't have to combine two separate bakes. You can just do it in Toolbag. It's absolutely wicked. Let's just change my brush size a little bit bigger here. Just a bit bigger. So instead of me having to go around in circles, I can literally just do that. And you can see they all just straightened out. And then when I let go, it rebakes. Now you can see it's rebaked the normal map, but it hasn't rebaked the ID map. So I'll have to go in after and do that. But essentially, it's the exact same process for a lot of this stuff. If I do this one quickly, let's have a look what happens there. So yeah, the frontal distance still isn't enough, but it's kind of got that one. But yeah, I won't do all of these. Like I said, this one as well, you would do. That'll change slightly. Oh, you can see that's actually a massive difference. You wouldn't even notice it. So you can see there that the angle of light is actually getting shaded down this normal, and you wouldn't necessarily notice that, but that's actually incorrect. So if I had baked this detail at planar as the planar type, then boom, completely fixed. So I've managed to keep my my edges, and I'm now getting my details coming through. So that's just what I wanted to show you with that one. And yeah, I could just keep going on and on and on, but you get the idea. So I've actually just accidentally touched the edge here, and so that's you can see that error coming through now. So if you accidentally do it too far and I let go, see that problem's coming through. So that's me editing the baking angle on the paint skew, and then paint offset. You can. The other good thing about let me just turn off the skew. The other good thing about Toolbag that I really like as well is you can actually see the cage. Show offset, yeah. So you can actually see the cage protruding. So it's going to bake from this point onto that part of the mesh. And you can, if I move the setting, you can now see the distance of where it's going to take the furthest point and bake onto. Another reason why this is good as well is because you can see intersecting errors really easily. I think you can turn up the opacity, yeah. So if I turn this all the way up, you can see here, as I push out my projection of the cage, it's starting to overlap itself right here. So that's when you're going to get, to hell with it, I'm actually just going to bake that. Let's see what happens. Bake. So we should just get some really, yeah, you can see that because of this overlapping, you can see that it's trying to bake this piece onto this bit here and this piece onto that bit there. So yeah, you want this really as tight as you can get it to the between the high and the low. So if I just turn on my high there, you can see some of these bits are sticking out. So I just want to push this ever so slightly further until it just like with the sandwich, just push it just enough. And then you can see here I'm having, don't worry about that red. That's just paint coming through from my the skewing. But you can see here that this sticks way outside the cage. So when I bake this, I'm just not going to get it. There we go, baked, and turn off the high. You can see it's just not going to happen, whereas this other side, yeah, it's totally fine. That's just a painting issue from the skew, don't worry about that. Cool. Actually, it might be the cage. But yeah, so you can easily combine the two. So that's really wicked. And just the last thing I want to show you on here is, just like I was showing you with the cage, so just turn that back on and turn back down the opacity. 0.5. You can actually paint the offset of the cage as well. So it's exactly the same as the other one. You just want to turn it up to your proper resolution. Offset. And then let's say this, what was that funny thing here? Yeah. So I don't think the resolution will support this, but the idea is basically that you do the same thing. You'd paint this area, and then it's going to push out the cage physically in those specific points. So that doesn't really show a whole lot. If I think actually I know a better way of showing this. If I just clear this, so I can just clear this whole map and reset it back to the default. And if I just drop this cage down a little bit, back to the point where we were starting to get some of those details coming out the top. Why then? Oh yeah, because I haven't got the high turned on. That would help. So yeah. So I want it to be there if I'm going to do a bake, but I'm just going to push it in just a little bit like that. So anything sticking out is not going to bake correctly onto our low poly. So going back into paint skew, sorry, not paint skew, paint offset. What I can now do is I can paint on top of these areas. Is that working? I think it's because I've got the cage turned up. No? Yeah, there we go. Just turn off the high poly as well. There we go. So yeah, you can see here, if I just quickly bake this again, it's just going to cut off these details. Yeah, see, they're horrible now. And that's because my cage is too low and it's not capturing enough of my high poly. So what I can do now is go into here and I can paint the offset on that specific area. And if I just drag around this area, hopefully this should just fix it. And then bake that. It's going to bake. Okay, it's fixed it a bit. It hasn't done quite what I wanted to demonstrate. Let's have a look. Let's try something else. Maybe I've got the wrong color. Maybe it's just meant to be white instead. That might be the issue. Let's try to do this one as white. No, that's not really helped either. But yeah, anyway, it's meant to push out the cage. So yeah, so that's the 2 points I really wanted to bring home about this. I think it's a resolution problem because I haven't got enough resolution on my cage. But yeah, so you can fix most of your problems in Marmoset Toolbag and then export into Painter using those 2 settings of instead of having to do 2 bakes, you can do that and you can do paint skew. Cool. So let me just clean that all back up. So let's just stick that back to clear. Yeah, wicked. And let's stick that back to clear. And then let's just bake all our maps. Okay, so let's just turn on all of these, happy family, and this, I might actually just turn off ambient occlusion for now because that's the only one that takes a while, just for the sake of time, and let's just rock it. Let's see what happens. Okay, so you can't see it, but currently on another screen, I've got a bunch of textures popping up. This one's baked, this one's baked, this one's baked. So right now it's struggling on thickness to get that one done. That's what would happen with ambient occlusion as well. And wicked, I should have them all baked now. Let's have a look. If I go, let's just turn off all this nonsense. Let's turn off this offset. And let's just go to here, and this should be all of my maps. Let's just open this up. So let's have a look. So this is what's outputted. So it's done this one, this one, this one. That's material ID. Normal object position. So we've literally got all the same maps. This one is inverted that you need to do before you take in the painter I was talking about earlier. And then that's our albedo color. So if you want the colors that you set on the high poly, you need to do albedo. If you do the material ID one, it's gonna basically create these random colors which are as contrasting from each other as possible, which is, to be honest, probably a better thing. But yeah, so we've got all our maps now. Those maps aren't perfect. Like I said, I would have to go and do the whole skewing thing and offsetting thing and etc. to make sure it's all perfect. But at least you just understand the principles, and we'll come back to this in a sec. But let's just finish the presentation now. Been talking for quite a while. So this is just advanced stuff or things you want to keep an eye on. Okay, so extra tips, the green channel. So this is more of a texturing thing, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But basically, there's 2 types of normal maps. You've got OpenGL and DirectX. The Y channel basically, you know how in 3D space you have X, Y, Z. The Y channel is basically flipped in those 3D engines, so you need to flip it in the normal map. That was literally just a checkbox setting in Toolbag, as you saw. And it's actually one of the opening session settings for Painter as well. So yeah, it's really easy. You can just do it in Photoshop or even in the software itself. And the reason why you'd want to do this though is if you have the wrong Y direction, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. So this is the correct Y direction, and this is the wrong Y direction. Now what you can see here is that the shadows and the highlights are the right way around, but the shadows and the highlights are the opposite way around. You'll just get some really weird shading like look it's just not going to look right, and you won't be able to put your finger on it. And it's probably that you just haven't flipped the green channel on your normal texture. So just keep in mind, when every single game engine has different different directions, you can easily look up which ones they are. Just keep that in mind. Masking. So just some of the ways with Painter. You know, the thing about being in industry is you don't always get the software you want. You might not have Marmoset, Toolbag, and stuff. You might just have Painter. So you just got to make do. So I'm just going to talk about some ways you can do masking. So you can just, if you have your model in Painter, you can literally just make a color layer, and you can just literally just get a paintbrush and put down a base layer of black, and just get a paintbrush and just paint some straight edges around all your bevels, and just and then you can take that, and this would be what your exported texture would be. Just export that as a color texture. Or the other way you could do that, which I wouldn't recommend this way because it's easier to do it in the 3D viewer, but this will be a bit cleaner. Is you can actually just get the UV stencil, export it from Maya or whatever, stick it into Photoshop. You can select that layer. And you can modify and expand the selection. On here I've expanded it by 5 pixels, and you can see that it's actually just expanded around the edge of the shell by 5 pixels, and then you could just do the same thing where you fill the block color of white or whatever on the black background, etc, etc. So I would prefer doing it this way, but just you can do it in an image editor if needed. That's just a good thing to know. Downsampling. Okay, this is where we start getting some really nice bakes going, if you know these things. So this is these are both 256 pixel textures that have been baked, and this is one that, just like we did, this was one that was baked at 256. This one was baked at 1K, and then the person scaled it all the way down and crunched it into a 256. And you can see he's actually getting a bit cleaner lines on the anti-aliasing. So general rule of baking is that when you bake, you want it to be twice the resolution as your texture. So if someone says to you, hey, we need a 1K wall texture, well, when you bake that texture, you're going to want to bake it at 2K, and then when you export it as from Painter, it will be 1K. So when you just like when I set up the project, I could set up the texture settings resolution. And when I went into the baking settings, it had its own texture resolution size as well. So me personally, I would double. The thing to think about there is that if someone wants you to have a 4K texture, and you're going to double the size of the bake, you're going to have to bake an 8K texture if you want to keep up this, this charade. So just be a bit wary about the upper ends of texture sizes. And baking 8K is quite fun, I'm not going to lie, but it's also can be a massive waste of space if your UVs aren't optimized, etc, etc. But yeah, exploded bake. This one's cool. I like this one. So this is an easy technique you can do with any animation software, Maya, Blender, anything. So what this guy has is he's got his model of a phone box, and just like with the overlapping intersecting errors, he doesn't want the whole thing smashing on top of himself. And I think this was actually a thing more before you could do the underscore high and underscore low suffixes. So what you can do is you can set a keyframe for all of these objects, move your timeline across, just scrub it to like, a second in advance in the future, and then you can move these all out of the way and just keyframe those, and then you can actually scrub between the whole model being in one piece and then expanding, and you can just export this as your high poly, and do the same with your translation with your low poly as well, and then all the pieces will be like away from each other, so they won't intersect with each other. With fingers, because it's all just one mesh rather than all of these being separate meshes, you might have to detach the fingers and then move them apart and then bake them and then apply that. The good thing that I just want to mention about this though is that when you bake like this, your low poly has the exact same UV map as when it was together. The UV map hasn't changed at all. So whatever you bake like this, when you apply it back to the original model, it's just going to be like as if nothing had ever happened, but you just won't have any intersection. So he's then applied this this is a Painter screenshot, and you can see he's baked it like this, but he's then applied those textures of the bake to the actual combined model. That's something you can do in Painter as well, is you can actually, when you have a low poly, you don't have to stick with that low poly. You could import, say, this low poly, bake that, and then in the same project file you can just re-import this combined low poly, and all of the textures that you baked on here would just automatically apply to here. It's a little bit tricky with like brush strokes and things, but you can do this all in one Painter scene. That's pretty cool. Taper details. Okay, this is quite a niche one, but it's really good to know. So what is the difference between these two hexagons? And just to mention, shout out to Joe Wilson who did this. This is on a polycount thread. Absolutely amazing, trying to fix a coin problem. So these basically look the same, but they actually have a big difference. When these two are baked, and this is a height map bake, which actually it pushes out the geometry rather than normal map, which is just faking the lighting. You can see here that this left one has really nice like flat edges, and this one has some really weird janky ones. And what's the difference? And it's the same with normals. This one is coming out very thin, whereas this one is coming out a little bit thicker on the edges. So this is going to show up in engine a lot nicer, whereas this is going to be quite hard to see. The difference here is this is an exaggerated example of this one, is that this is just a perfectly straight cylinder, and this one's actually got a tapered edge to it. And what's happening with the planar bake is you're just capturing a camera shot straight down. So if this face looks identical to the bottom face, there's no transition. It can't see, like it literally cannot see. Like I can just quickly show an example in here actually. If we just make a quick, let's just make like a plane, and let's stick that over there, and then let's just make a cylinder. Let's just expand that, and let's make them not green, please. What's Lambert 1? Okay, apparently Lambert 1's green. Okay, that's red. Should have named these. Okay, there we go, got there in the end. Okay, so if you just put this down a little bit, so it's not, let's just put it on 8-sided. So when you're baking the planar, this is all that so you're baking rays of light from the high poly through onto the low poly, and if you were to do that, this is all it can see. Like the high poly and the low poly are there, but you can't see it, the difference, because this is the angle of light. The orthographic light is just hitting straight down. It doesn't see it at all. So this is what that demonstration basically is if you just grab these lower vertices and you just expand them, if I go back into the top view actually, if you just expand them ever so slightly, something like that, it doesn't have to be extreme, just a little bit, you know, maybe even less than that, you know, just so it's a little bit less noticeable. Yeah, even just something like that, that's going to show up on a bake a lot cleaner than if you didn't do it at all. So I wouldn't do this in film, because in film you just use the high poly straight up. I would only do this if I know I'm doing a bake, probably for game. So yeah, just taper your details. And in that complicated version, the weird cube I did with the cylinders and stuff, the hard bake, I actually did taper all of the details on like the triangles and the you know, all the little pieces, just so I could easily, it would come up a lot easier to see the differences between the baking software than something like this, more noticeable. And then this is just an example of when I did the production for Impossible Rescue, the game. I tapered the details on this I-beam, and you can see the shadows and the highlights are coming up a lot cleaner than if I just did it flat. These extra lines on the side would have just been really hard to see. So yeah, taper details. Cool. Use alphas. Okay, so this is another comment during Leonardo Lezzi's thing. So these are pictures from his thing. You could just do the average normals bake, and then instead of having to do a whole separate other bake, you could just stamp alphas of like normal map alphas onto the mesh in Painter, and you'll save yourself a lot of time. Now this is really good, but something I want to remind you of is that when you do bake, it's not just the normal you need to focus on; it's the normal and the ambient occlusion. With some game engines, they do ambient occlusion differently, but just for prop work, just assume that you need to do ambient occlusion. So a lot of the alphas you'll find on marketplaces, they'll have the normal alphas, but you won't have the ambient occlusion alphas with them. So if you're a perfectionist like me, I would kind of, if I had the time, I'd prefer to bake those details because I know ambient occlusion would be there. But people are now starting to put up alphas where you get displacement, AO, normal, and the actual alpha itself, so you can cut away the opacity of the size, just like the chain. These black areas would be missing, and it would only show up the detail itself. And you can add these, you can literally import these into Painter, combine them into a single paintbrush, and you can stamp them on an object, and they'll come up really cleanly. And I've actually got a review here. I'll just show you these. Here it is, Cyberpunk Alphas by Mels Mneyan. Sorry if I butchered your name there, mate. And you can see here, I've actually written a comment. These are genuinely the best alphas I've ever used as Substance Painter. Combining normal and AO is an essential step in faking baked data. The fact you get alpha and displacement as well also means that these turn out just beyond beautiful when you use them. I think we've got a thumbs up there, wicked. Cool, so yeah. So when you're looking for alphas to save time, I highly recommend getting the AO as well, at least. And then something else that makes his one special is he's optimized the noise. So on here, it's a little bit hard to see because the image is small, but he's got some quite jagged edges when you stamp the alphas. Whereas on because he's gone through this process of making the alphas where he's optimized the edges and made them, cleaner for 3D modeling specifically, you can see that these are a bit more what you'd see from like a bake. So yeah, that's just another thing to keep out for, an eye out for, jagged edges, not optimized, creating noise. What else have we got? Triangulation. Okay, so when you export a model from when you're doing a bake, you should really triangulate the model, the high poly, before you do the bake. I didn't do it on those last or any of the examples we did earlier. So yep, triangulate for export. And when mirroring textures mirror the triangles, I'll show you examples of that. So in here we've got some sort of shape, and this isn't triangulated. These are all quads. Now, when you look at this, if you were to cut these edges together, it might be something like this. There's an edge here, there's an edge. I would definitely cut an edge like that. You can see that it's coming into the side here. But if you don't triangulate your mesh and it triangulates it in the software or in the engine, it might do it automatically for you. And if it does that, it might not do it the way you want it to. So you can see here some sort of software. He's just put in the quad data into a software, and it's automatically triangulated it. Substance Painter automatically triangulates as well. And you can see that instead of it cutting it across here, it's cut it completely the opposite way. So if you bake that and then you put it in engine, it's going to cause you problems. So just a top tip: triangulate your mesh, your high poly, before you bake, and it will do it the way you want. When mirroring textures, mirror the triangles. So basically what's happening with this gun here, you can see there's a shading error here. And like I said, you might not necessarily know that this is another UV problem. You can see basically what he's doing is he's got two halves of the gun, the left and the right side, and one texture is being flipped across both sides. So he's only actually baked half of the gun, and it's being mirrored onto both sides. Now the problem here is that with his triangulation, these ones are mirrored. Whereas when you get to the top here, these ones are cut in the same angle. Whereas really what it should be doing is going this one on the right's fine, but this one on the left should be going the opposite way. But because he hasn't mirrored his triangulation down the center where he would be flipping the texture, it's now causing him a shading error because the way that normal maps work, etc., etc. But yeah, so just make sure that your triangulation, when you do triangulate, is this is if you're doing mirroring a texture to the two different multiple places on an object. Cool. Samples. So this is something I touched on a little bit. We've all seen it online where you see someone's work and they're just really noisy. So it probably looks something like this. Oh, he's a cute penguin, isn't he? I think it's probably a Blender model. But yeah, you can see here that this is a very noisy and grainy image. And what's happened is that there are not enough rays of light flooding the render to be able to accurately depict all the areas. And you can denoise it, which is kind of like faking and stuff. But what you really just need to do is increase the ray count so you get enough a lack of noise. So what does this look like in baking? So here we have an example of ambient occlusion. And the ray count, I think this is in Marmoset Toolbag. I think Joe Wilson put this up on the baking page. I'm actually just going to show you that quickly. There is a baking tutorial you can get for Toolbag, which is really incredible, and it's got all like these complicated things about all the stuff I've shown you and all the different this is what we're looking at now, and yeah, literally like all the different maps you can bake out and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm literally just stealing this from there. But yeah, you can see here that he's not got enough rays of light, so it's creating these like really artifacted, noisy areas. And when he increases that count, it increases the baking time, but you get much cleaner results. Anything else on this page? I think that's it. Yep. Oh, actually, the other thing I want to talk about that I didn't mention was subsamples. Subsamples, I'm actually just going to jump back into Toolbag here. You can see here samples. This is it's called subsamples in Painter. That's why it's written like that. So just to read off what it says: samples per pixel. Higher numbers may yield better quality for some outputs, but it will greatly increase the baking times. So what it's basically doing is, if I set this to 1, I'm just baking one texture. Let's say I'm just baking that one 2K texture. If I set this to 4, I'm now baking 4 2K textures and then overlapping them on top of each other and compressing them to create a really clean edges and results. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's just like a simplistic view. So basically, for those screenshots I showed you earlier with the normal and the curvature and the comparisons of this one between the other software, I ramped them all the way up to times 64, and I even went into some of these settings like in where is it? Where's ambient occlusion? and you can turn up the ray count here, so you can see the default is 256. So I generally, as a rule of thumb, sometimes I just double things. So if I just double that, and then let's just bake this even now. So I've actually, there won't be any difference with all these other maps, so I don't actually need to bake those, so I can just turn these all off. Well, actually, it'll be a massive difference because I've got times 64. All right, this is going to take ages if I do times 64, so I'm just going to put this back down to times 4 just for the sake of demonstration. Let's bake that. So this is going to add ambient occlusion to it now. Yeah, it takes a while. So this loading bar would have taken like 8 times longer the more I ramp up that sample setting. And you can't really see it, but this has now got ambient occlusion on it, and it's actually just baked me out an ambient occlusion map, which I'll just quickly show, which looks like this. So it's just baked this out just now. But yeah, so you can even see, if I zoom in here, you can see it's still a little bit grainy. So if I really, well, to hell with it, let's just do it. Let's ramp these up a bit. Let's stick it up to 1024, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to remove floor's not on, that's a different thing. So let's bake that. So just to say again that these details won't be baking correctly because I didn't do the skew, I just reset it. So yeah, you can see it's taking a lot longer now, and that's only turning up the samples for the ambient occlusion map. That's not even turning up the samples for all of the textures quality. So let's have a look. AO, that's just reloaded, and hopefully this should look a lot less noisy. I think that's more of a resolution thing, but yeah, the transitions are pretty nice. So yeah, samples are important. So what I recommend to you is you just keep everything really low when you're just doing your test bakes, trying to work out the cage height and things like that, just trying to make sure all your ID colors come up. And then when you're happy with all your settings, that's when you ramp up all these settings to, you know, double, quadruple them, etc., etc. Cool. Let's go back to the presentation. So not too many slides left now. Dithering. So you can get different quality types of images. So an 8-bit image, just showing here, you get this type of banding. There's these little bands of yellow, then bands of orange, then bands of yellow, there's bands of blue, just all across in this kind of like rainbow effect. And then if you double the bitrate or of that, or bitrate or quality of that, can't remember the specific name for it now actually. If you double the colors, the color accuracy for that texture, you get a lot cleaner result where you don't get this banding. However, the cost of that is that you're greatly increasing the size of the texture, which in games design the biggest problem is textures being too big and etc etc. So a good middle ground is actually to just do something called dithering, whereas what it does is it takes the bands and it takes a color and it looks at the colors around it and it just kind of interpolates those colors together and kind of just blends the colors with each other. So dithering is a really cool option. And you can see here, if I just go into like the normal, I wouldn't do it in normals, but maybe like, yeah, let's just have a look in here. So in ambient occlusion, there is an option for dithering that was automatically turned on by default. And then in some of them, yeah, there's dithering. So yeah, in specific baking, there's some of them you can get dithering, and some of them, yeah. Some of these you do not want dithering in. Just to say now, I've baked some of these and then realized why it looks horrible, and it's because I've had dithering on. So it's kind of different for every single those multiple textures. So this is an example of these different types of normals applied to those to a model. So you can see here you're getting some banding artifacts. This one is really clean and nice, but this is kind of, you get this like kind of speckled noise, but you're saving massive space on your texture texture size by doing dithering. So this is probably the type of thing we'd do in game engines, and this is probably the type of thing we'd do in film. Not that you really bake in film, but yeah. And then here's just a more extreme example. There's a 16-bit TIFF here, and there's a 32-bit. So this is even double the 16-bit one. And I honestly cannot see the difference. Maybe over like a much larger model you could see the difference, but in this specific example, I just wanted to throw it in that I didn't see a difference between these two when I looked at them up close. Floaters. Okay, so you don't actually have to have all your models perfectly sitting on the mesh. Before, when normal and AO were just the thing, if you do this with thickness, it's going to screw you around, so you've got to be a bit wary of this. You can actually have your details sitting slightly above the mesh, the low poly, and then when you bake down, they will just appear on the low poly like this. The problem with this is that ambient occlusion looks for it's looking for where light is occluding. So if you have things literally hovering in thin air, the ambient occlusion is going to get messed up. So this is okay with normals. Some of the connections here are a little bit strange. But with ambient occlusions, it's a bit of a mess. Now, more recent updates of Painter and other crazy things, you can actually get around this now with a thing called ignore backface. So just as an example here, so someone's baked floaters here, and you can see that the ambient occlusion is totally fine compared to here, where the distance is included here. And all they've done is at the end of the high poly suffix, they've just added ignore BF. So that's a setting that you can change that as well, just like you can change high and low in Painter. So just, yeah, floaters are pretty cool. It can save you some time. A lot of stuff online, you can just drag in some 3D meshes or whatever and just have them hovering and bake them quickly. Planar bake flat down. But yeah, just consider that you're trying to fix normal and you're trying to fix AO. People often like to forget about AO. Manual cages. So you can manually create cages. In XNormal, you have to manually create a cage. It's really frustrating. But so with Painter and with Toolbag, it was automatically pushing out the frontal and rear distance, kind of like this. You can see that this red is pushing off the low poly. But why would you need a cage? So if you had something complicated like a bicycle, you can't just have a low poly as a big cylinder. You kind of need to have individual cylinders for every single one of the spokes. So when it comes to like complicated models that intersect quite easily with each other, sometimes, well, this is more of an older thing, but people would manually create cages specifically for baking to stop intersections and stuff like that. So this is just a quick example of setting up your model for XNormal. Every single vertex you have on a model actually has a number secretly, and I've just toggled on the display for that in Maya. You can see here that this vertex here is numbered 0, and this is my cage, this outer one, and this is the low poly, the inner one. And this vertex is number 1, where you can see on the low poly, this one's number 6 and this one's number 9. If you take that into XNormal and try to bake it, it's going to be like, nope, don't like that, don't understand. And the reason is because it's trying to take 1 from here and 1 from there, and then bake the distance between it. So what you need to do is you need to renumber your vertex count. And it's a really simple way of doing that in Maya. I won't show it, but basically you go on the tool and you just click 1, 2, and 3, and then you go on the other mesh and you just click the exact same 3 vertices, 1, 2, and 3, and then they'll all be perfectly matched. So yeah, you need to make sure your vertex counts numbers are identical for your cage, high and low if you're doing a manual cage in XNormal. That's if you're doing average normals on, basically. In XNormal, you can get away with the planar bake, just the detail one with no cage. So yeah, XNormal is quite a good tool still for as a fallback option, and I'm pretty sure you can bake all the maps. And just for fun, let's actually just open it up. Let me just minimize this. Do I have it on here? Oh, it's right there. Cool, wicked. Let's just load up XNormal so people can see it. Because it's a bit old school, and like I said, one of the downfalls of this is it hasn't got a 3D view. So yeah, it looks like something out of like early 2000s. But yeah, you load in your low def meshes and you load in your high def meshes, and you then have to add a cage somewhere in here. I can't remember the details. I'd have to look at it a bit more. And then you've got all sorts of settings. So you've got baking options here, and you can turn on. It's actually got quite a lot of stuff you can bake. So you can see curvature. You've got some older maps like translucency and derivative and stuff like that. The direction map, radiosity. That's quite an old one. Cavity is quite a cool one. That's just basically a much tighter version of AO. So for like little skin cracks. Wrinkles and stuff like that, and yeah, just some really weird ones. So you can get some other maps like a proximity map and stuff like that. So yeah, XNormal is actually quite good, and it's the same stuff as well. You got edge padding, and I'm sure the sample, yeah, anti-aliasing is basically the same as the sampling and stuff. But yeah, all the same stuff, just in a different form. And you bake it out, and there is some form of 3D viewer. Let's just have a look at that. But yeah, I don't want to dive too deep into this, but yeah, you can bake in here. It's just a massive, it can be a bit of a pain. So let's just close that. Okay, let's move on towards the end. Weighted normals. Okay, this is basically the end of the presentation now. Weighted normals is quite advanced stuff. There's a modifier and you can get in Blender, which makes it a little bit easier. But basically, what it is I showed you how you have hard edges and soft edges earlier on. The trick to it is that you can basically adjust the angle of a soft edge vertice to be more straight, like a hard edge, without all the extra shading. So you can still see here that there is just one normal here, but it's shading as if this was a hard edge. And then there's you got to be really careful with this, because if you do this incorrectly, which this is a bit more artistic than actually needed, you can break the realism of the object and you'll start getting some weird shading problems. So here's just a really clean way of showing that. So on the left here, you can see this model has hard edges, and it's got for every face, it's got a vertice pointing out, a normal pointing out that vertice. On here, you've got the soft face. And then here you've got a fully weighted normals modifier applied in Blender, and you can see that they're sticking out perpendicular, just like the hard one, except it's got the same lighting calculation data as the soft one. So this is really cost effective. It's the same cost as the soft version, or the shade smooth version, but it gives the appearance of the shade flat or hard-edged version. So that's just something to look into. This is something I know, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on this. This is something I'm kind of dabbling with now. And I believe that's it. Wow, that was intense. It's been 2 hours, can you believe it? Congratulations to anyone who stuck around for this. So just to recap quickly what we looked at, opening, what is the focus, what is texture baking, why we use it, what are normals, the two types of bakings, the pros and cons of those, the best of combining both of those, UVs are mainly your problems in troubleshooting, projection settings are remaining 20% in troubleshooting, software baking comparisons between XNormal, Substance Painter, and Marmoset Toolbag, and then extra advanced tips. And then closing. So just to reiterate, the beginner, the intermediate, and the advanced. If you can bake an average normals bake and just get something, then you're a beginner and you can do it. If you can get both of them and perfectly combine them, you're intermediate. You've kind of got everything going for you. And then if you can do loads of all that extra stuff in the moving forward extra tips, then you're starting to get into quite advanced stuff. And then just to say again, my name is Ryland Taylor, and if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or on ArtStation, go for it. I'm always happy to network with people. So much fun. And thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something useful. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and I really do hope you learned something. I'm just going to throw the plug out there again one last time. I cannot congratulate them enough for this one. The Leonardo Lezzi's baking normal map, showing all of this stuff. Like I said, I'm just regurgitating the stuff I've read. Carlos Lemos, this one's free now. This one used to be free. This one is free. This goes deep into normal maps and shows you a lot of the stuff. And then just a quick shout out again to Joe Wilson. I think I've actually got an example of some of the stuff he does. Yeah, so this is Joe Wilson. He's just really helpful online, showing people their problems and how to get around them. Absolute hero. I might actually be able to find what's it called? Heights coins. I think I called it coins. Yeah. So this is an example of the post that he's been putting up on the internet. So this guy had a problem baking coins, baking height for coins, and he was I think that's actually, yeah. You can see here he's got this horrible edge problem when he comes out. And Joe Wilson, Earthquake, like a hero, comes in, saves the day, explains the problem, and then just showed you all the images that I just showed you. And then lo and behold, this guy has his coin problem fixed now that he's tapered all the coins. So yeah, this guy is an absolute hero for troubleshooting online when it comes to baking. So yeah, thank you for watching again, and have a great day.